The champagne glass shattered against the mahogany wall, sending crystal shards and Dom Perignon spraying across priceless artwork. Absolutely not. I'd rather throw myself off the penthouse. Blake Montgomery's voice thundered through his corner office that overlooked Manhattan like a god surveying his domain. At 35, with steel blue eyes that dismantled boardrooms and a jawline that graced business magazines monthly, he had built Montgomery Innovations into a tech empire valued at $87 billion. His father, Walter Montgomery, former CEO and current chairman of the board, remained unruffled in his seat, casually brushing an invisible speck from his bespoke suit. "You'll do exactly as I've outlined, or by this time next week, you'll be running nothing more valuable than a lemonade stand." Walter's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades commanding an empire. "The board has concerns about your lifestyle choices, the revolving door of models and actresses, the yacht incidents, the Twitter wars with other CEOs. It's called creating a brand, old man. Elon did it. Elon wasn't hemorrhaging investors because they think he's unstable," Walter countered, sliding a folder across the glass desk. "Our stock dropped 12% after your little escapade in Monaco hit the tabloids." Blake snatched the folder, skimming the board's resolution with growing disbelief. "This is medieval. You can't force me to get married." "We're not forcing anything. You're free to walk away from your position as CEO. Your 29% stake in the company remains yours. Of course, without controlling interest." Walter let the implication hang. Blake stalked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his reflection, a dark silhouette against the New York skyline that had always been his to command. "And who exactly am I supposed to marry in this farce? Another vapid socialite of your choosing?" Walter stood, straightening his tie with practiced precision. "Catherine Hayes." The name hit Blake like an unexpected jab. "The Ice Queen of Hayes Publishing. You can't be serious." "Deadly serious. Her father and I have been discussing this for months. Hayes Publishing's digital transformation is floundering, and they need our tech expertise. We need their media connections and content libraries for our new platform launch." "So I'm what, a business transaction?" Blake's voice dropped dangerously. "You're the CEO of a publicly traded company worth billions. Everything you do is a business transaction." Walter moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. "Catherine is arriving for dinner tonight at 7. Your engagement will be announced next week at the charity gala. You have until then to charm her. Or clean out your office." The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded like a prison gate slamming shut. Blake reached for his phone, stabbing at the screen. "Olivia, get me everything on Catherine Hayes. And I mean everything. Every interview, every social media post, every man she's dated." "Sir, I have Ms. Hayes' father on the other line. He says it's urgent." Blake's jaw clenched. "Tell George Hayes I'm in a meeting plotting his daughter's imminent disappointment. Actually, he says Catherine's flight landed early. She's on her way up to your office now." As if on cue, he heard a decisive knock. Blake froze, his mind racing through escape scenarios, all involving the private helicopter pad on the roof. When the door swung open, without waiting for his response, Catherine Hayes stood in his doorway, 5'8" of controlled elegance. In a tailored charcoal suit, her chestnut hair swept into a professional knot that emphasized sharp cheekbones and intelligent hazel eyes, not the type of beauty that typically populated his yacht parties. Something more dangerous, more substantial. "Mr. Montgomery." Her voice was cool, cultured, with just a hint of rasp. "I believe we have some mutual imprisonment to discuss." For the first time in years, Blake Montgomery found himself momentarily speechless. Catherine stepped into his office, surveying the broken glass and champagne-splattered wall with one arched eyebrow. "I see you've taken the news with your renowned maturity. How reassuring for our future together." Blake recovered, a practiced smile sliding into place. "Ms. Hayes, What a pleasant surprise. I was just redecorating. Clearly, she placed her designer bag on a chair. Let's skip the pleasantries. I despise this arrangement as much as you do. But unlike you, I respect my family's legacy enough to do what's necessary to protect it. How noble, Blake drawled, moving to his bar to pour himself a scotch. Drink? No. Some of us prefer to keep our wits when negotiating hostile takeovers. Blake laughed despite himself. Is that what this is? Catherine's perfectly painted lips curved into something almost resembling a smile. Make no mistake, Mr. Montgomery. If I'm being forced to marry you, I will be taking over. Your reputation, your habits, your collection of international phone numbers. All of it ends the moment we announce this engagement. Blake took a slow sip of his scotch, studying her over the rim of his glass. She wasn't cowering, wasn't flirting, wasn't trying to placate him like most people did. It was refreshing and absolutely infuriating. Here's a counteroffer, he said, placing his glass down with deliberate care. We announce the engagement, make public appearances, sign whatever business deals our fathers have cooked up. And in 6 months, we have a very civilized, very quiet breakup citing irreconcilable differences. Catherine tilted her head, considering him. You really think you can charm me into submission in 6 months? Sweetheart, I wouldn't need 6 months. His voice dropped to the tone that had launched 1,000 tabloid rumors. But since we're going to be partners in this charade, I'll be a gentleman and give you time to adjust to the idea of actually enjoying my company. Instead of blushing, Catherine laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face and momentarily threw Blake off balance. Oh, that's adorable. You think your little bedroom voice works on women with functioning frontal lobes. She stepped, closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and subtle, not the cloying sweetness he was accustomed to. Let me be clear. I'm here to save my family's company and apparently, by extension, your position. I don't need to like you. I certainly don't need to sleep with you. All I need is for you to show up, smile for cameras, and sign where I tell you to sign. Their eyes locked in silent combat, neither willing to retreat. Olivia's voice broke, through the intercom. Sir, your father is requesting confirmation of dinner plans with the Hayes family tonight. Without breaking eye contact with Catherine, Blake responded, Tell him Ms. Hayes and I will host dinner at my penthouse instead. We have terms to negotiate. Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication she was surprised by his countermove. Well then, darling, she said, infusing the endearment with enough frost to trigger another ice age. I'll see you at 7. Don't bother with the champagne. I prefer whiskey. She turned and walked out with the confident stride of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. Blake watched her go, mind already calculating angles and strategies. If Catherine Hayes thought she was walking into this arrangement in control, she was about to learn why they called him the Shark of Silicon Alley. Game on. Blake's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming skyscraper in Tribeca, a monument to minimalist luxury with floor-to-ceiling windows that transformed sunset into an art installation. Tonight, however, he paced the expansive living room like a caged predator, checking his watch every 30 seconds. James, where the hell is she? Blake demanded of his personal assistant, who was arranging flowers with military precision. It's only 6:55, sir, James replied, unflappable as always. In the decade he'd worked for Blake, he'd seen everything. From supermodels throwing Louboutins to competitors threatening lawsuits. An arranged marriage barely registered on his crisis scale. The private chef has prepared the menu you requested. The 25-year Macallan is decanted. And yes, I've hidden all evidence of last weekend's gathering. Blake shot him a look. It was a business meeting. Of course, sir. Business meetings frequently involve synchronized swimmers in your rooftop pool at 3 a.m. The elevator chimed. Before Blake could respond, Catherine Hayes stepped out, a vision in an emerald silk dress that managed to be both modest and devastating. She'd let her hair down, literally, with chestnut waves cascading past her shoulders, transforming her from boardroom ice queen to something far more dangerous to Blake's peace of mind. "You're early," he said, suddenly aware he was staring. Professional habit. She surveyed the penthouse with an appraising eye. Impressive, though I expected more bachelor cliches. No zebra print throws or neon beer signs. I keep those in the dungeon with my collection of hockey trophies and fossilized pizza crusts. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Ah, so you do have a sense of humor buried under all that arrogance." "I'm a man of many hidden talents," Blake replied, guiding her toward the terrace where dinner awaited, most of which you'll discover during our brief engagement. "I've prepared a comprehensive list of expectations and boundaries," Catherine said, producing a slim folder from her purse. "I thought we should establish the parameters of our arrangement before the circus begins." Blake opened the folder to find a meticulously outlined contract. "Jesus, Catherine, you've scheduled our public appearances down to the minute. The couple will hold hands for a minimum of 4 minutes at each event. Did you time this with a stopwatch? Efficiency is sexy, Blake, or so I'm told." Catherine accepted the glass of whiskey he offered. Page 3 outlines the social media strategy. Your Playboy image needs immediate rehabilitation. Blake skimmed the document with growing disbelief. "You want access to my Instagram account? Absolutely not. Your last post was a shirtless yacht photo captioned, 'Board. Meeting in session.' Your social media privileges have been revoked. That post got 3 million likes. And cost us 2 advertising contracts with family brands," Catherine countered. "The Catherine Hayes brand doesn't associate with men who pose with champagne bottles positioned as phallic symbols." "It was Dom Perignon Rosé," Blake muttered, flipping to the next page. "Wait, what's this about living arrangements?" Catherine sipped her whiskey, her composure infuriating. "The engagement needs to be convincing. I'll move in next week." "Here, with me?" Blake looked genuinely alarmed for the first time. "Separate bedrooms," she clarified. "Don't worry, your virtue is safe." "My virtue hasn't been safe since 2005, Blake replied, closing the folder. "Look, I agreed to the engagement announcement, the public appearances, even limiting my partying, but cohabitation crosses a line. Your father's board ultimatum didn't mention exclusions for living arrangements," Catherine reminded him. "Besides, it's the most efficient solution. We can coordinate our schedules, present a united front, and work on the integration of our company's interests." "So romantic," Blake drawled. "Do you have a section in there about prescribed pillow talk?" Page 7, subsection C. Blake couldn't tell if she was joking, and that worried him. The private chef appeared with the first course, a delicate seared scallop dish that Blake would normally appreciate. Tonight, he barely tasted it as he watched Catherine across the table, trying to get a read on her. Most women in his orbit were transparent in their motivations: fame, money, connections. Catherine Hayes was a cipher. "You haven't asked for anything personal," he observed. "No jewelry allowance, no vacation requests." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "I have my own money, Blake. Everyone wants something. Yes, I want Hayes Publishing to survive and thrive in the digital age. I want my father's legacy protected, and I want to get through this farce with my sanity intact." She met his gaze directly. "What do you want, beyond keeping your CEO title?" The question caught him off guard. No one asked what Blake Montgomery wanted. They assumed they knew. Money, power, beautiful women, fast cars. "I want to launch Nexus," he said finally, surprising himself with the honest answer. "It's a platform I've been developing for 3 years. Integration of media, communication, and commerce in a way that hasn't been done before. Your father's content libraries would give us a significant advantage in the market." Catherine studied him, seeming to reassess something. "That's actually not terrible," At least your ambitions extend beyond collecting supermodels. I haven't collected anyone in... Blake trailed off, realizing he was about to lose this particular argument. The point is, this arrangement could benefit us both professionally. So we're agreed? We announce the engagement next week. I move in. We build a convincing public narrative. And behind closed doors, we work on integrating our companies. With amendments, Blake said, reaching for a pen. I'll review your contract and propose counter terms. Such as? For starters, we're going to need a better how we met story than our fathers arranged it. Something with more spark. Fine. I saved you from choking on an olive at a charity gala. I saved you from an overzealous admirer at the Met Gala. We bonded over an argument about cryptocurrency at a TED Talk. Blake grinned. Now you're getting it. Catherine rolled, her eyes. But Blake caught the slight curve of her lips. Progress. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. Dinner going well? Catherine is a remarkable woman. Don't screw this up. Blake glanced at Catherine, who was delicately cutting her entree while simultaneously making notes in her planner. Remarkable wasn't the word he'd use. Maddening, fascinating, potentially catastrophic to his peace of mind. My father sends his regards, Blake said, putting his phone away. He thinks you're remarkable. And what do you think? Catherine asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. I think... Blake considered his words carefully. I think this might be the most interesting business negotiation I've ever conducted. The evening progressed with a strange blend of business discussion and personal revelation. Blake learned that Catherine spoke 4 languages, had climbed Kilimanjaro last year, and hadn't dated anyone seriously since a messy breakup with a British publisher 2 years ago. He found himself sharing stories about his early days coding in his college dorm room and his plans for philanthropic initiatives in tech education. By the time they stood at the elevator, something had shifted. The hostility hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved into something more complex, a wary mutual respect. So, Blake said, leaning against the wall, should we practice? Practice what? Our first public kiss will be at the engagement announcement. Wouldn't want it to look awkward for the cameras. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Nice try, Montgomery, but I was the regional debate champion 3 years running. It'll take more than transparent tactics to outmaneuver me. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. I'll have my team send over the revised contract tomorrow. Be prepared to negotiate terms at lunch. Lunch? Blake echoed. Balthazar, 1 p.m. Witnesses will see us having an intimate meal. Smile for the inevitable paparazzi. The doors began to close. Oh, and Blake? Wear the blue suit. It makes your eyes look almost sincere. The doors closed on her enigmatic smile, leaving Blake staring at his reflection in the polished metal. For the first time in recent memory, someone had challenged him, refused to be charmed by him, and then left him wanting more of their company rather than less. Well, damn, he muttered to himself. This arrangement was going to be far more complicated than he'd anticipated. Stop. Fidgeting with your tie, Catherine whispered, her smile perfectly fixed for the sea of Manhattan elite surrounding them. The annual Metropolitan Children's Hospital Gala transformed the museum's Grand Hall into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence, with champagne flowing as freely as the charitable donations. This tie is trying to strangle me, Blake Sunin muttered through his own camera-ready smile. Like someone else I know. Your father looks pleased, she observed, ignoring his comment. Walter Montgomery stood across the room, deep in conversation with George Hayes, both patriarchs occasionally glancing toward their children with poorly concealed satisfaction. They look like cartoon villains who just successfully captured the superhero, Blake said, snagging 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter. Drink. You look like you need it more than I do. Catherine accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. 3 days of intensive relationship building had included lunch at Balthazar, where they'd argued about literature, a Central Park stroll, conveniently photographed by paparazzi, where they'd argued about tech ethics, and an intimate dinner at Le Bernardin, where they'd argued about everything else. The tabloids were already speculating about their relationship, exactly as planned. 20 minutes until the announcement, Catherine said, checking her watch. Are you ready? To commit public relationship seppuku? Always. Catherine's professional smile slipped for a moment, revealing something more genuine underneath. Your martyrdom is noted, Mr. Montgomery. Blake, he corrected. If you're going to be my fiancé, you should probably use my first name. Blake, she conceded, the word sounding unexpectedly intimate on her lips. Something in her tone made him look at her. Really look at her. Tonight, Catherine wore a midnight blue gown that transformed her usual businesslike elegance into something ethereal. Tiny diamonds were scattered through her upswept hair like stars. You look beautiful, he said, the words escaping before his usual filter could catch them. Surprise flickered across her face. That almost sounded sincere. I'm capable of sincerity, on rare occasions, usually during solar eclipses and leap years. Catherine laughed, a real laugh that reached her eyes and did strange things to Blake's pulse rate. There's hope for you yet, Montgomery. Before he could respond, Walter appeared at his side. It's time, his father said, steering them toward the small stage where the hospital director waited. As they walked, Catherine's hand slipped into his, warm and surprisingly small. Blake looked down at their interlaced fingers. 4 minutes of hand-holding, as contractually obligated. Catherine murmured. I started the timer when my father began walking over. You're impossible, Blake said, but he found himself squeezing her hand lightly. The hospital director welcomed them to the stage with practiced enthusiasm, launching into a speech about Montgomery Innovation's generous donation to the new pediatric research wing. Blake's attention drifted to the teleprompter at the back of the room, where his carefully prepared statement awaited. And with a special announcement from Blake Montgomery himself, the director finished, gesturing for Blake to take the microphone. The lights seemed suddenly brighter, the crowd larger. Blake had given countless speeches, presentations, and interviews, but this felt different. A strange reluctance gripped him as he approached the microphone, Catherine at his side. Thank you all for coming tonight, he began, his media-trained voice carrying through the hall. Montgomery Innovations is proud to support the groundbreaking work happening at Metropolitan Children's Hospital. Innovation isn't just about technology. It's about making a meaningful difference in people's lives. His eyes found the teleprompter, the scripted announcement scrolling steadily. With a sudden impulse he couldn't explain, Blake abandoned the script. I'm also grateful to share this evening with someone special, he continued, turning to Catherine. The surprise in her eyes was genuine. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. You think you have everything figured out, and then someone walks into your office. A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the crowd and challenges every assumption you've made. Catherine's perfectly composed expression faltered slightly. Catherine Hayes isn't just a brilliant businesswoman. She's the most authentic person I've ever met. She calls me on my bullshit. He caught himself. My nonsense. She refuses to be impressed by anything but genuine merit, and frankly, she terrifies all my worst impulses into hiding. More laughter, warmer this time. Blake took Catherine's hand again, ignoring her questioning look. Which is why I count myself the luckiest man in New York tonight. He reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box that wasn't part of their plan. Catherine's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a vintage emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Catherine, will you marry me? The gasp from the crowd was nothing compared to the genuine shock on Catherine's face. This wasn't in the contract. The announcement was supposed to be a joint statement about their engagement, already presented as a fait accompli. not a public proposal with an unscripted speech and a ring she'd never seen. For a terrifying second, Blake thought she might actually slap him on stage in front of New York's entire social register. Instead, Catherine recovered with impressive speed, her eyes communicating murder while her smile remained dazzling. "Yes," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the dangerous glint in her eyes. "Nothing would make me happier." The crowd erupted in applause as Blake slipped the ring onto her finger. He drew her close, whispering in her ear, "Sorry for the surprise. Smile for the cameras, sweetheart." "I'm going to kill you," she whispered back through her perfect smile. "Slowly, with your overpriced tie." Then, because the moment demanded it, and because some reckless part of him had been wondering about it since she'd walked into his office, Blake kissed her. He'd meant it to be brief, perfunctory, a performance for their audience. But the moment, his lips touched hers. Something electric and unexpected passed between them. Catherine stiffened in surprise, then responded with a warmth that contradicted every cool interaction they'd shared. The applause faded to background noise as the kiss deepened, becoming something neither of them had scripted. When they finally broke apart, the flush on Catherine's cheeks wasn't acting, and the slight disorientation Blake felt had nothing to do with the champagne. "That wasn't in the contract either," Catherine murmured, her composure visibly rattled for the first time since he'd met her. Before Blake could respond, they were surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations. The next hour passed in a blur of handshakes, air kisses, and champagne toasts. Catherine played her role flawlessly, the perfect besotted fiancé, though Blake caught the occasional sharp glance promising future retribution. It wasn't until they escaped to a quiet alcove that she finally dropped the act. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, keeping her voice low. "We had a plan, Blake. A carefully orchestrated announcement. Not whatever romantic comedy scene you decided to improvise." "It worked, didn't it?" Blake gestured toward the main hall, where guests were still buzzing about their engagement. "Now everyone thinks it's a love match, not a business arrangement. Even the cynics. That's not the point. We're supposed to be partners in this. Equal partners. You don't get to make unilateral decisions about our narrative." Blake had the decency to look slightly chagrined. "You're right. I should have discussed it with you." "Yes, you should have." Catherine twisted the ring on her finger. "Where did this even come from? Please tell me you didn't send your assistant to Tiffany's this morning." "It was my grandmother's," Blake said quietly. Catherine's anger faltered. "Your grandmother's? She gave it to me years ago, said I should save it for someone extraordinary." He shrugged, aiming for nonchalance and missing by a mile. It seemed appropriate for the moment. "Blake." Catherine's expression softened. "I can't accept this. A prop ring from the jewelry vault, sure, but a family heirloom?" "Keep it for now," he insisted. "It completes the picture. We can discuss it tomorrow." Before she could argue further, Blake's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and frowned. "It's James. There's some issue with the Tokyo acquisition that needs immediate attention." "Go," Catherine said, her professional demeanor slipping back into place. "I'll make our excuses and follow shortly." Blake hesitated. "Are we okay? Professionally speaking?" Catherine considered him for a long moment. "We will be. But our contract needs serious amendments after tonight's performance." "I look forward to the negotiations," Blake said with a hint of his usual swagger, relieved she wasn't actually furious. As he walked away, Catherine called after him softly. "Blake?" He turned. "It was a good speech," she admitted. "Completely. Unauthorized and contractually invalid, but good." Blake grinned. "High praise from the Ice Queen. Don't push your luck, Montgomery. I still have that tie assassination planned." His laughter echoed as he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and a vintage emerald ring that felt strangely right on her finger. She glanced at her reflection in a nearby mirror, noting the lingering flush in her cheeks and the slight swelling of her lips from their kiss. This wasn't proceeding according to plan at all. And for Catherine Hayes, who had planned every minute of her professional life since college, that was the most unsettling development of all. "That goes in the guest room," Catherine directed as movers carried in a sleek bookcase. "And please be careful with those boxes. They contain first editions." Blake leaned against the kitchen island, watching the controlled chaos of Catherine's move into his penthouse with bemused fascination. What he'd expected to be a few suitcases had evolved into a full-scale invasion, complete with furniture, art pieces, and enough books to stock a small library. "Are you moving in or performing a hostile takeover?" he asked, sipping his coffee. Catherine glanced up from her clipboard. "Clause 24B of our revised agreement specifies that I'm entitled to transform designated spaces into a comfortable working and living environment. I don't recall signing off on importing half of Manhattan." "You were distracted," Catherine said with a pointed look. "Something about an emergency conference call with Tokyo that mysteriously resolved itself after you'd escaped the gala." 3 days had passed since their engagement announcement, and the media frenzy had exceeded even Catherine's meticulous projections. Their kiss, that unexpectedly genuine moment of connection, had been captured by dozens of cameras and splashed across every tabloid in New York. A power couple was trending on Twitter. Their respective company stocks had jumped 8%. By all metrics, the plan was succeeding brilliantly. So why did Blake feel so unsettled? "The East Wing is yours," he conceded, gesturing toward the sprawling guest suite and adjoining rooms. "But the rest of the penthouse remains a democracy." "A democracy where you hold 51% of voting rights?" Catherine raised an eyebrow, directing another mover toward the east hallway. "I prefer to think of it as a benevolent dictatorship." "Of course you do." Catherine checked another item off her list. "We need to discuss the calendar for this week. We have dinner with the Renshaws tonight, the Tech Summit panel tomorrow, and I've scheduled a casual brunch with the Vogue team on Sunday." "About that," Blake said, stepping closer and lowering his voice. "I need Thursday evening free. Bored. Dinner that's been planned for months." Catherine frowned. "Thursday is the Hayes Publishing Literary Awards. Your attendance is non-negotiable. My father specifically mentioned it when we revised the agreement." "Send my regrets. I'll make it up to him." "That's not how this works, Blake. The whole point of this arrangement is presenting a united front for both companies." Catherine put down her clipboard, her expression serious. "My father expects both of us there. Your absence would undermine everything we're trying to achieve." Blake ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "The board dinner is crucial. I need to shore up support for the Nexus launch. Then we have a problem." Catherine crossed her arms, her stance mirroring his stubbornness. They locked eyes in what had become their familiar standoff, neither willing to concede. Blake was unaccustomed to not getting his way. Catherine was incapable of compromising her meticulously crafted plans. "Perhaps I can offer a solution?" James appeared with impeccable timing, as always. Blake's assistant had developed an uncanny ability to materialize when tensions peaked. "Mr. Montgomery, the board. Dinner could be moved to Wednesday. I've already confirmed most members are available." "And Ms. Hayes?" he continued smoothly. "The Hayes literary event could benefit from featuring Mr. Montgomery prominently, perhaps announcing a new digital initiative for authors. It would position Montgomery Innovations as a champion of creative content ahead of the Nexus launch." Blake and Catherine exchanged impressed glances. "James," Blake said, "remind me to double your Christmas bonus." "Already noted, sir." As James tactfully withdrew, Catherine studied Blake thoughtfully. "Your assistant is frighteningly efficient. He keeps me from self-destructing on a daily basis," Blake admitted. "Much like someone else I'm becoming acquainted with." Something in his tone made Catherine look up sharply. For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and an awkward silence fell between them. Neither had mentioned their kiss since the gala. though Blake found himself replaying it at inconvenient moments, during conference calls, board meetings, and particularly in the pre-dawn hours when sleep evaded him. "Speaking of self-destruction," Catherine said finally, breaking the tension, "we should discuss domestic ground rules." "Ah, the fun part of marriage," Blake quipped, relieved to return to safer territory. "Let me guess. Alphabetized spice rack and color-coded towels?" "More like basic cohabitation courtesies," Catherine corrected, though a smile tugged at her lips. "For instance, I'm an early riser." "Of course you are." "And I prefer quiet mornings with coffee and the news before starting work," Blake nodded. "Noted. I'm a night owl and occasionally bring work home. I promise to keep late calls in my office." "Appreciated." Catherine hesitated. "And regarding overnight guests?" Blake's eyebrows shot up. "Planning on entertaining Ms. Hayes?" "I'm establishing parameters for both of us," she clarified, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "While our arrangement is in effect, I think it's wise to maintain exclusivity for appearance's sake. You're asking me to be monogamous with my fake fiancé. I'm suggesting that tabloid photos of either of us with other romantic interests would undermine our business objectives," Catherine replied crisply. "It's a practical consideration." Blake studied her for a moment. The Catherine Hayes he'd met 2 weeks ago would have presented this as a non-negotiable clause with spreadsheets of potential PR damage. This slightly uncertain version was intriguing. "Agreed," he said simply. "No other romantic entanglements for the duration." Catherine blinked, clearly having expected more resistance. "Good. That's good." Another loaded silence fell between them, broken by the arrival of more movers with an elegant desk. "Office," Catherine directed, visibly relieved by the interruption. "Follow me. I'll show you where to place it." As she walked away, Blake found himself watching her with unexpected appreciation. The Catherine who commanded movers with military precision was the same woman who'd stood her ground in his office that first day, confident, composed, and completely immune to his usual tactics. Yet there had been moments since then, her genuine laugh during their Central Park walk, her surprised vulnerability during his unscripted proposal, and just now, that flicker of uncertainty that suggested layers he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, Blake found himself genuinely curious about a woman beyond the surface attraction. A dangerous development, considering their arrangement's temporary nature. By evening, Catherine's integration into the penthouse was complete. The movers had departed, leaving behind transformed spaces that somehow blended seamlessly with Blake's existing decor. Her books filled previously empty shelves, her art added color to minimalist walls, and the subtle scent of her perfume lingered in shared spaces. Blake returned from a late meeting to find Catherine curled on the terrace sofa, illuminated by the Manhattan skyline. She'd changed from her moving day outfit into silk lounge pants and an oversized cashmere sweater, hair loose around her shoulders, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. The domesticity of the scene struck him with unexpected force. For years, he'd fiercely guarded his independence and privacy, rotating through relationships that remained deliberately superficial. No one left their mark on his space or his life. Yet somehow, in less than a day, Catherine Hayes had transformed his penthouse from a showcase into something resembling a home. "Productive day?" he asked, stepping onto the terrace. Catherine glanced up, removing her glasses. "Very. My team has already identified synergies between Hayes Publishing's content libraries and your Nexus platform. I've drafted preliminary integration plans." "Always working," Blake observed, dropping into a chair opposite her. "Do you ever just exist without a goal in mind?" Catherine tilted her head, considering the question seriously. "Not often. I find purpose motivating. What about pleasure? Spontaneity? The joy of an unplanned moment?" Says the man whose assistant schedules his haircuts 3 months in advance, Catherine countered with a knowing smile. Blake laughed. Touché. I suppose we're both control. Freaks in our own ways. Some things are worth controlling, Catherine said, her expression softening as she gazed out at the city lights. My mother died when I was 12. My father built Hayes Publishing from nothing, working such long hours that I practically lived in the office after school. I started organizing his files, answering phones, making coffee for executives before I was tall enough to reach the pot. Blake watched her profile, struck by this glimpse into her past. You were taking care of him. We were taking care of each other, she corrected gently. But yes, I learned early that structure, and planning provided safety when everything else felt chaotic. By 15, I was sitting in on editorial meetings. By 20, I had my own imprint. That explains a lot, Blake said, his usual sarcasm absent. About your clipboard addiction and contractual relationship approach. Catherine smiled ruefully. I suppose it does. What's your excuse? Surely Blake Montgomery didn't emerge from the womb with $100 billion ego and trust issues. Trust issues. I'm wounded. You're deflecting, she observed. Fair exchange, Blake. I showed you mine. Something in her direct gaze made evasion seem suddenly childish. My father is a brilliant businessman. Cold, calculating, always 3 moves ahead. My mother left when I was 8, chose freedom over the Montgomery empire and never looked back. I'm sorry, Catherine said softly. Don't be. She sends birthday cards from different exotic locations each year. Current count, 32 countries and counting. Blake shrugged. Meanwhile, Walter made it clear that the family legacy was everything. Performance was the only acceptable currency. I became the perfect Montgomery heir on paper, Harvard, coding prodigy, business wunderkind. And the playboy reputation? The calculated public image? Blake's smile was genuine, but tinged with something darker. My one act of rebellion. If I had to be the perfect Montgomery businessman, at least I'd do it on my own outrageous terms. Drive my father and the board crazy while still delivering record profits. Catherine regarded him thoughtfully. So your entire public persona is essentially an extended middle finger to your father. When you put it that way, it sounds childish. No, Catherine said, surprising him. It sounds human. The simple statement, delivered without judgment, created a moment of unexpected intimacy between them. They were no longer business adversaries or reluctant partners, but 2 people with carefully constructed armor recognizing something familiar in each other. The moment stretched, comfortable and dangerous simultaneously. Blake cleared his throat. We should probably prepare for dinner with the Renshaws. Yes, Catherine agreed, gathering her documents. I'll be ready in 30 minutes. She paused, at the terrace door. Blake? For what it's worth, I think there's more to you than either persona, the perfect Montgomery heir or the rebellious playboy. She offered a small, genuine smile. I'm curious to see who else might be in there. As she disappeared inside, Blake remained on the terrace, unsettled by her perceptiveness and the fact that, for the first time in recent memory, he found himself wanting to live up to someone else's expectation. Not his father's, not the board's, but Catherine's quiet belief that there might be something more authentic beneath his carefully crafted facades. Dangerous territory, Montgomery, he murmured to himself as the city lights blurred before him. This was supposed to be a straightforward business arrangement. 6 months of public appearances, merged business interests, and a civilized parting of ways. Clean, clinical, controlled. Nothing in that plan accounted for Catherine Hayes seeing through him with unsettling accuracy, or the growing realization that their enforced proximity might be the most honest relationship he'd had in years. You absolutely cannot wear that tie with that suit, Catherine declared, striding into Blake's closet without knocking. After 3 weeks of cohabitation, boundaries had begun to blur despite their separate bedrooms. The Hayes Literary Awards are traditional, but not funeral adjacent. Blake glanced down at his selection, a conservative charcoal suit with a black tie. What's wrong with it? Everything. Catherine disappeared into the depths of his expansive closet, emerging with a silk tie in deep burgundy. This one. It says, "I respect literature, but I'm not being buried with it." Blake accepted the tie with a raised eyebrow. "I wasn't aware my accessories communicated so eloquently." "Everything communicates something," Catherine replied, checking her watch. "Car will be here in 10 minutes. As she turned to leave, Blake caught her wrist gently. "Wait. You look..." He paused, taking in her elegant emerald gown and swept-up hair. The vintage ring on her finger, his grandmother's ring that she'd continued to wear despite her initial protests, caught the light. Stunning. A faint blush colored her cheeks. These moments of genuine appreciation had been happening more frequently, catching them both off guard. "Thank you. The dress is appropriate for the event while subtly connecting to Montgomery Innovations brand colors, as outlined in the appearance guidelines section." "Catherine," Blake interrupted, with a smile. "Take the compliment without turning it into a strategic analysis." She hesitated, then nodded. "Right. Sorry. Still learning to... Anyway, thank you." The dynamic between them had shifted gradually but unmistakably over the weeks. What began as strategic cooperation had evolved into something resembling friendship, punctuated by moments of connection that neither quite knew how to address. Their public appearances had become less performative, their private conversations more genuine, which made their looming separation all the more complicated. "Ready for this?" Blake asked as they stepped into the elevator. "Your father mentioned the awards are being live-streamed this year. More exposure for both companies." Catherine nodded, professional mask slipping back into place. "And the perfect opportunity to announce the Nexus collaboration with Hayes Publishing authors." Blake studied her profile as the elevator descended. "You know, we could discuss something other than business strategy for the 20-minute car ride." "Such as?" "Such as why you've barely mentioned our 6-month deadline recently." The words escaped before he could reconsider them, hanging in the air between them. Catherine's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "The arrangement is proceeding as planned. We're 3 months in, with 3 remaining. The integration of our business interests is on schedule." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Blake?" Catherine's voice remained controlled, but her eyes betrayed uncertainty. Before he could respond, the elevator reached the lobby. Catherine stepped out, professional smile firmly in place as she greeted their driver, effectively ending the conversation. Blake followed, torn between frustration and relief. The question had been impulsive, poorly timed, and uncomfortably revealing of his own conflicted feelings. 3 months ago, their arrangement had seemed straightforward. Now, watching Catherine charm the driver with her warm smile, a genuine smile he'd gradually learned to distinguish from her professional one, nothing felt straightforward at all. The Hayes Literary Awards transformed the New York Public Library into a cathedral of literary celebration, with publishing luminaries mingling among celebrity authors and industry power players. As the daughter of George Hayes and current editorial director, Catherine moved through the crowd with practiced grace, introducing Blake to key figures with the perfect balance of personal warmth and professional connection. Blake found himself genuinely impressed by the easy authority she commanded in her element. In his world of tech and venture capital, Catherine was a formidable adversary turned ally. Here, among the literary elite, she was a respected visionary, greeted with genuine admiration by everyone from Pulitzer winners to industry veterans. "Mr. Montgomery." A voice pulled Blake from his observations. George Hayes approached, martini in hand. "Enjoying your first Hayes Awards?" "It's illuminating." Blake admitted. Catherine clearly learned from the best. George's eyes softened as he watched his daughter across the room. She surpassed my expectations years ago. Hayes Publishing would be half its current size without her innovations. Yet you were willing to marry her off for a business merger, Blake observed, unable to keep a slight edge from his voice. Is that what you think happened? George looked genuinely surprised. My boy, no one marries off Catherine Hayes against her will. That woman has rejected acquisition offers from every major media conglomerate with a smile and devastating counterproposals. Blake frowned. But my father said, Walter suggested the merger, certainly, and I mentioned it to Catherine as a possibility, expecting her usual strategic objections. George sipped his martini, eyes twinkling. Imagine my surprise when she requested your company profile instead. The revelation hit Blake like a physical blow. She initiated this? In a manner of speaking. She was intrigued by your Nexus platform, concept before Walter ever suggested personal entanglement. George shrugged. The engagement approach was dramatic, but effective. Your father's board backed off, our companies aligned, and public perception soared. Classic Catherine efficiency. As George excused himself to greet an arriving dignitary, Blake remained frozen, mentally reframing the past 3 months. He'd assumed Catherine was as trapped as he was, an unwilling participant in their father's manipulation. The idea that she might have chosen this arrangement, strategically assessed him as a viable partner, changed everything, and explained nothing about the genuine connection that had developed between them. His eyes found her across the room, laughing with a renowned novelist. As if sensing his gaze, she glanced up, her smile softening when she caught his eye. She raised an eyebrow in silent question. Before he could respond, the lights dimmed, signaling the ceremony's beginning. Catherine made her way to him as guests found their seats. Everything okay? She whispered as they took their places in the front row. You look like you've seen a ghost. We need to talk, Blake replied quietly. After the ceremony. Concern flickered across her face, but she simply nodded as her father took the stage to welcome attendees. The next 2 hours passed in a blur for Blake. He applauded mechanically as awards were presented, authors gave heartfelt speeches, and Catherine herself presented the Lifetime Achievement Award with eloquence that drew a standing ovation. When it was his turn to announce Montgomery Innovations' partnership with Hayes Publishing for digital content development through Nexus, he delivered the prepared remarks flawlessly, despite the questions churning inside him. Throughout it all, he felt Catherine's occasional concerned glances, her hand finding his during key moments, a gesture that had become natural between them, no longer performative but instinctive. The complexity of his emotions only intensified with each small contact. When the ceremony concluded, they navigated the requisite networking with practiced coordination, moving through conversations efficiently while maintaining the public image they'd perfected. To anyone watching, they were the ideal power couple, attentive, complimentary, clearly in sync. It was nearly midnight when they finally escaped to their waiting car. As the door closed behind them, Catherine turned to him immediately. What's wrong? You've been distracted all evening. I had an interesting conversation with your father, Blake said carefully, studying her expression, about how our arrangement came to be. Catherine stilled, her composure faltering momentarily. I see. Do you? Because I'm still trying to understand why you let me believe this was entirely our father's machination when apparently you were evaluating me as a potential business partner before the engagement was ever suggested. That's not exactly... Did you choose me, Catherine? Blake interrupted, needing a direct answer. Was I a strategic target all along? Catherine's professional mask slipped completely, revealing a complex mix of emotions. It wasn't that calculated, Blake. Yes, I was aware of your work on Nexus. Yes, I thought a partnership could benefit both companies. But the engagement was my father's suggestion, amplified by yours. Yet, you agreed remarkably quickly for someone who supposedly despised the idea. Because I recognized a good business opportunity, Catherine countered, a defensive edge entering, her voice. Just as you did, once you got past your initial tantrum. My tantrum? Blake's voice rose despite the confined space. I broke a champagne glass, Catherine. You engineered a fake engagement. Which has worked exactly as intended, she replied, her own composure fraying. Both companies are thriving. Your board is satisfied. We've built something valuable together. That's not the point. Then what is the point, Blake? The point is that I thought we were in this together. Both unwilling participants who made the best of a bad situation. I thought we were building honesty between us. His voice dropped. I thought I was getting to know the real Catherine Hayes, not another calculated business persona. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. For a moment, hurt flashed naked across her face before she composed herself. You're right, she said finally, her voice unnaturally steady. I should have been completely transparent about my prior interest in Nexus. That was a mistake. The formal acknowledgement only frustrated Blake further. This isn't about corporate transparency policies, Catherine. This is about us. There is no us, Blake, she said quietly. There's a business arrangement with a predetermined expiration. Date. In 3 months, we announce an amicable separation, divide the business assets we've merged, and return to our separate lives. That was always the plan. Plans change, Blake said before he could stop himself. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. What are you saying? The car pulled up to their building before Blake could respond, the doorman already moving to open their door. The interruption gave Blake precious seconds to regain his composure, to question the impulse that had nearly led him to admit feelings he hadn't fully processed himself. They maintained silence in the elevator, the tension between them palpable. Not their usual combative energy, but something more, fragile and dangerous. When they entered the penthouse, Catherine moved immediately toward her wing. I think we both need space to... Don't, Blake said, surprising them both with the quiet intensity in his voice. Don't retreat into your strategic corner. We need to finish this conversation. Catherine turned slowly to face him, arms crossed protectively. Fine. You're upset that I had prior knowledge of Nexus before our arrangement. I've acknowledged that omission. This isn't about Nexus, Blake said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It's about the fact that something real has developed between us, something neither of us planned for in our meticulous arrangements, and I need to know if I'm the only one feeling it. The raw honesty hung between them, impossible to retract or ignore. Catherine's careful composure, cracked vulnerability seeping through. Blake, even if there were feelings developing, it doesn't change our situation. This isn't a real engagement. It's temporary by design. It doesn't have to be, Blake said, stepping closer. The business integration is working. Our personal compatibility has proven successful. What if we considered continuing? Continuing the charade? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Blake said simply. Continuing for real. For a moment, something like longing flashed across Catherine's face. Then slowly, her professional mask reassembled itself. You're confusing proximity with genuine connection, she said carefully. We've been playing roles for months, living in close quarters, presenting ourselves as a couple. It's natural to develop attachment under those circumstances. Is that what your strategic analysis tells you? Blake asked, hurt converting to anger. That my feelings can be dismissed as a psychological side effect of our arrangement? I'm trying to be realistic, Catherine insisted. 3 months ago, you couldn't stand me. You called me the Ice Queen and fought against this engagement with everything you had. Because I didn't know you then, Blake countered. I didn't know about your ridiculous color-coded planner system or how you talk to yourself when proofing documents. I didn't know you drink whiskey when you're celebrating, but tea when you're stressed. I hadn't seen you kick off your heels under conference tables or caught you dancing in the kitchen at midnight when you think no one's watching. Catherine's eyes widened at each intimate detail he'd noticed, each private moment he'd treasured. I didn't know, Blake continued more softly, that behind all your perfect planning and professional efficiency was someone passionate, principled, and unexpectedly kind. Tears gathered in Catherine's eyes, but her posture remained rigid. Blake, please, we can't do this. Why not? Because it would change everything. The words burst from her with unexpected force. The entire foundation of our arrangement would shift. The business integration, the company expectations, our personal independence, all of it would be compromised by emotional complications. Some things are worth complicating, Blake said, stepping closer. Catherine backed away, shaking her head. I can't, I'm sorry. I need to maintain clarity about what this is and what it isn't, for both our sakes. The wall between them was almost visible now, Catherine retreating behind her professional defenses, Blake standing exposed with feelings he'd never intended to develop. So that's it? Blake asked, bitterness creeping into his voice. Back to the original contract? 3 more months of pretending, then a clean break? Catherine's expression was a masterpiece of controlled pain. It's what we agreed to. Right, Blake said flatly. The agreement. How could I forget? He turned away, unable to bear the sight of her struggling composure any longer. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Good night, Catherine. As he walked toward his bedroom, he heard her quiet response, so soft he might have imagined it. I'm sorry, Blake. The door closed between them with quiet finality, leaving both alone with truths neither had been prepared to face, and decisions that would determine whether their reluctant arrangement might become something neither had dared to imagine. The following weeks unfolded in a careful dance of avoidance. Blake and Catherine maintained their public facade flawlessly, smiling for cameras, attending events arm in arm, presenting the perfect power couple to the world. But behind closed doors, the penthouse had never felt larger or more empty. Catherine buried herself in work, often leaving before Blake woke, and returning after he'd retreated to his office. Blake threw himself into finalizing Nexus, spending long hours at the office and scheduling business trips that seemed increasingly necessary. James and Catherine's assistant, Vanessa, exchanged worried glances as they coordinated the increasingly complex schedules designed to minimize their employers' private interactions. They're miserable, Vanessa observed, reviewing the calendar. Catherine approved a manuscript yesterday without a single edit. That's unprecedented. Blake has taken up running, James replied gravely. Something is clearly wrong. But the professional machinery of their arrangement continued functioning perfectly. The Nexus platform integration with Hayes Publishing content proceeded ahead of schedule. Stock prices soared. Business publications praised the innovative partnership, with Forbes featuring them on its cover as the future of media. Only Walter Montgomery seemed to notice the strain beneath the success. He cornered Blake after a board meeting, 6 weeks after the Hayes Literary Awards. You look terrible, Walter observed bluntly. Trouble in paradise? Paradise is functioning at peak efficiency, Blake replied, sorting through documents without meeting his father's eyes. The Nexus launch is tracking 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I wasn't asking about Nexus. Walter studied his son with uncharacteristic concern. I was asking about Catherine. Blake's hands stilled. Catherine is fine. We're fine. Everything is exactly as arranged. That's the problem, isn't it? Walter asked quietly. You've stopped playing by the arrangement. Blake finally looked up, surprised by his father's perceptiveness. When I suggested this partnership, Walter continued, I expected a business merger, perhaps a friendship. I didn't expect you to fall in love with her. I'm not, Blake began automatically, then stopped, the denial hollow even to his own ears. Walter smiled slightly. You know, your mother left because I wouldn't choose her over the company. I always told myself it was necessary, that the Montgomery legacy deserved that sacrifice. His expression grew distant. I've had 30 years to reconsider that calculation. Why are you telling me this? Blake asked, unsettled by this unprecedented glimpse into his father's regrets. Because you have a choice I never allowed myself. Walter clasped his son's shoulder. Don't make my mistake. As his father walked away, Blake remained motionless, confronting truths he'd been avoiding for weeks. Catherine sat alone on the penthouse terrace, New York glittering below her like scattered stars. 6 months ago, she'd entered this arrangement, with Blake believing herself immune to emotional complications. 3 months ago, she'd begun to recognize the danger. 6 weeks ago, she'd retreated into the safety of their original agreement, terrified by the vulnerability Blake's confession had exposed. Now, with only 2 weeks remaining before their scheduled amicable separation, she could no longer ignore the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. Her phone chimed with a message from her father. Final contract revisions look good. Announcement of separation ready for legal review. You've handled this perfectly, as always. The praise felt empty. For the first time in her career, perfect. Execution felt like failure. The elevator chimed, announcing Blake's return. Catherine tensed, preparing for another evening of carefully choreographed avoidance. Instead, she heard him walk directly to the terrace door. We need to talk, Blake said without preamble, determination evident in his stance. Catherine steeled herself. About the separation announcement? I've reviewed the draft. It's not about that. Blake crossed to where she sat, his expression unusually serious. About us. Blake, we've already... 6 months ago, he interrupted. I told you I wouldn't need 6 months to charm you. I was arrogant and completely wrong. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. It took me 3 months just to see past my own ego to who you really are, and another month to realize I was falling for you. Catherine's heart thundered. Please don't do this. Not when we're so close to completing our agreement. That's exactly why we need to do this now. Blake took her hand, his touch sending electricity through her. In 2 weeks, we're supposed to announce our separation. Before that happens, I need you to know something. He drew a deep breath. I love you, Catherine Hayes. Not as part of any arrangement or strategic plan. I love your ridiculous schedules and your color-coded notebooks. I love how you fight for what matters and never back down. I love who I am when I'm with you. Tears gathered in Catherine's eyes. Blake? I'm not asking for an answer right now, he continued gently. I'm asking for honesty. These past 6 weeks, have you missed me? Not the arrangement, not the business partnership. Me. The question hung between them, demanding the one thing Catherine had always found hardest to give: emotional vulnerability without calculated outcomes. Yes, she whispered finally, the admission breaking through walls she'd built over a lifetime. Every day. Blake's expression softened with hope. Then why are we still pretending? Because it terrifies me, Catherine admitted, her voice unsteady. I've spent my entire life building contingency plans and exit strategies. I've never gone into anything without knowing exactly how it ends. And that works for business, Blake said, reaching to brush away a tear from her cheek. But love isn't a merger agreement, Catherine. There are no guaranteed outcomes, just the choice to risk everything for someone who matters more than certainty. His words resonated with truths Catherine had been avoiding for months. The perfect execution she'd always prized seemed suddenly hollow compared to the messy, unpredictable reality of loving Blake Montgomery. "What about our companies?" she asked, practical concerns still fighting for dominance. "The board expectations? Everything we've built?" "The business integration works," Blake said simply. "It works because we work, Catherine. Not just as strategic partners, but as us. The real us." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking for another contract, or even promises. I'm just asking for a chance, for us to try being together because we want to be, not because of any arrangement." Catherine looked into his eyes and saw what she'd been hiding from. A man who truly saw her, beyond her professional perfection and strategic brilliance. A man who challenged her, infuriated her, and somehow made her more herself than she'd ever been. "I'm terrible at improvising," she warned shakily. Blake's smile lit something warm inside her. "I've noticed. And I'll probably try to schedule spontaneity. I'm counting on it." Catherine took a deep breath, then did the most uncharacteristic thing in her meticulously planned life. She leaned forward and kissed him, without strategies or calculations, just the simple truth of what she felt. When they finally parted, Blake looked at her with wonder. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Catherine said, surprising herself with a laugh that felt like freedom. "God help me, but yes. I love you too, Blake Montgomery. Against all my better judgment and every strategic principle." Blake grinned. "The Ice Queen has melted." "Call me that again and I'll reconsider," she threatened without heat. "How about Mrs. Montgomery instead?" He brushed his thumb over the vintage ring she still wore, the one that had begun as a prop, but had come to mean so much more. Catherine's eyes widened. "Are you?" "Not officially," Blake clarified. "That would require a much more dramatic setting and probably violins. But eventually, if you'll have me, yes." Catherine smiled with a joy she'd never planned for, but suddenly couldn't imagine living without. "I'll consider it. After proper due diligence, of course." "Of course," Blake agreed, pulling her close. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As they held each other against the backdrop of the city lights, Catherine realized some arrangements couldn't be planned or scheduled or contracted. Some simply happened, defying prediction and calculation, and were all the more precious for it. 2 weeks later, when they were scheduled to announce their separation, they instead announced the transformation of their business arrangement into something permanent and personal. Walter Montgomery and George Hayes exchanged knowing smiles at the press conference, while James and Vanessa collected on office betting pools. And in a penthouse high above Manhattan, a contract sat forgotten in a drawer, while its former signatories discovered that the best agreements were the ones written, not on paper, but on hearts that had finally found their perfect match.